So finally, uh, Noémie Beauvais, she's gonna presenting her research. Noémie is a full-time community organizer and a part-time master's student in legal sciences at UQAM. She's affiliated with the SAGE Interdisciplinary Research Team on health, gender, and equality.
All right. Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here, and thank you, for coming. So my paper's title is Il m'a touché et je ne pouvais rien faire. So he touched me and I couldn't do anything. Undocumented women organizing against the denial of legal protection in case of workplace sexual harassment. In this presentation, I will cover the following subjects. So first, I will provide a bit of context concerning the presence of non-status people in Canada and the legal framework to which they're confronted when they suffer from workplace abuses. Then I will present the different components of my research field and discuss some of my findings. First, to define my object, I use the definition offered by Magalhaes and colleagues. So to them, undocumented workers are women and men who participate in the Canadian labor force by legally entering the country and A, not respecting the limits of their visa, or B, overstaying their visa's permitted time, as well as by illegally entering the country, including those smuggled across the border. In fact, we know that the vast majority of non-status people first arrived in Canada with a legal status. They were either temporary foreign workers, international students, or asylum seekers, and then lost their status and stayed in the country. As they have very limited access to social protection, non-status people are actually workers. Most are hired through temporary employment agencies that are less likely to verify their identity or offer their services directly to individuals. Various studies show that undocumented workers, especially women, are more likely to experience abuses in the workplace, such as not being paid adequately, suffer from psychological or sexual harassment, or facing reprisal if they denounce their working conditions or organize to change them. Non-status workers are also more likely to work in hazardous and health-threatening conditions. Whoa. Okay. Now, concerning the legal framework within which undocumented workers are considered, the first thing to look at is the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act and regulations. These prohibits foreigners from working without a work permit. Then, under the Quebec Civil Code, all employment contracts are subject to rules of formation and validity. Among other things, it stipulates that a contract whose object is prohibited by law or contrary to public order is void. Now, until 2006, the Quebec Labor Court adopted a formalistic approach to the notion of employment contract. In this context, the employment relationship of undocumented workers were considered void because they were based on the infraction of working without a permit. As a result, people without status were deprived from labor law protection, including access to workers' compensation. However, in the Undocumented case, this approach was discarded in favor of a public balance order approach. In a review of the initial decision, the right to compensation will be granted to this worker who did not hold a work permit, but who believed in good faith being entitled to work when the accident occurred. In fact, the Commission considered that the consequences of being deprived from the benefits of the law would be far more serious for him than the penalty he would incur under the immigration law for his offense. Now, despite the effect of the Enriquez case on subsequent decision, all judgments have granted protection to undocumented workers attached a great importance to the notion of good faith and the individual belief that he or she is entitled to work. However, this condition for leniency does not apply to the vast majority of cases involving people working without status. By emphasizing the distinction between these litigants and illegal immigrants, the court are creating categories of victims who are granted benefits of the law on merit. Moreover, it wasn't until November 2023 that the Senest internal policy changed. It stipulates that foreigners working without a permit does not correspond to the definition of a worker according to the law, since they do not have the legal capacity to contract. As a result, for more than 15 years, undocumented workers had their compensation claims systematically rejected by Senest, even though it was contrary to the state of law. Finally, even if the case law is slowly opening up access to protection for a non-status worker, it seems that very few of them are tempted to undertake legal action for fear of reprisal or being targeted by legal immigration authorities once the proceedings have been made public. Thus, there are still many obstacles to formal access to justice for a non-status worker. So in this context, I wonder, if non-status people don't seek legal recourse, what are they doing? How do they organize, right? So the question leading my research was, what are the responses of non-status women in Quebec to those obstacles they face to access legal protection for workplace sexual harassment? To answer this, I developed a case study with the Montreal's Immigrant Workers Center's Women's Committee. In fact, its member launched a campaign in 2019 to raise awareness and fight against workplace sexual harassment suffered by undocumented women. In this context, they advocate for processing of compensation claim and harassment complaints without regard to migratory status. The committee also demands that mechanisms be put in place to protect against potential reprisal so that undocumented workers do not risk deportation before their case is heard. So I used two methodologies to structure my research. First, I undertook a 6-month research field with the Women's Committee using observant participation. And to complete that, especially concerning the committee's history, I also used content analysis to interpret the committee's archive produced. Now, as a basis for data analysis, I used the notion of grassroots citizenship developed by Rachel Mayer and Janice Fine, which aims to shed light on the particularities of civic and political action of people excluded from citizenship. Grassroots citizenship comprised 3 elements. The first is the development of bonds of solidarity between members of a community facing similar situation. The second is the critical analysis of the social and political context in which members of these communities find themselves. For Mayer and Fine, critical analysis is about taking problems that are experienced as individual troubles and redefining them as social collective problems. Lastly, the third element is about collective action to demand social change. To them, organizing is only made possible when it builds on solidarity and critical analysis. Now that we've mapped out the research, let's take a closer look to some of my findings. So in the course of my observation, I realized that 2 common practices had the effects of encouraging solidarity and mutual aid among members. First of all, each meetings begin with a roundtable discussion in which participants are invited to share a few words about their mental state and the concerns they have. And as simple as this practice may seem, it proves to be one of the pillars on which mutual support within the group relies. Since the committee members have little access to mental health care, this allows them to vent some of the pain they're experiencing and to obtain emotional support from others. This space also enables women to name some of their needs. For example, one day, one of the women explained that she has lost her job as a result of the harassment she was experiencing. Not only she was able to name her emotion of anger and sadness, but she was also able to put in words the anxiety she felt at the idea of remaining without income for a long time. And facing this situation, several members of the group validated her emotion and gave her contacts so she could quickly find another job. Now, the second practice that encouraged solidarity is social event. Indeed, at the end of the meetings, members stay at the center to share a meal and to chat informally. This allows them to get to know each other and to develop bonds of trust and friendship. By doing so, solidarity takes on a more personal dimension rather than being focused solely on the struggle. In sum, members' solidarity is embodied in various ways. By sharing resources and calling on informal network, committee members have been able to compensate in part the lack of social protection they face. Thus, the support offered among committee members act as a bulwark against precarity. Now, regarding the committee's critical analysis, members are regularly invited to take part in various activities, such as popular education workshops, conferences, or film screening, to develop their thoughts on the social problems they faced. When they do so, the women are invited to present a summary of what they have learned at the next meeting to stimulate further reflection. In their discussions, I noticed that the intersections of the theme of migration and gender-based violence was particularly prevalent. Although many members have told me privately that they have left our country to escape domestic or family violence, they rarely talk about such violence in the group context. When they do discuss the causes of migration, they rather tend to point to poverty and instability due to war or criminality. Without using the term neocolonialism and capitalism, the committee members hold these systems of oppression responsible for immigration from Global South. These women are also critical of the Canadian and Quebec immigration system. They believe that these systems reproduce racist bias and systemic domination. For them, many women lose their status because of these reasons. For instance, the 3 members who arrived in Canada on closed work permit experienced harassment and sexual assault at the hand of their employers. 2 of them lost their status when they fled, and another one was dismissed as a continuation of harassment. The 3 of them regularly compared their experience to slavery. Finally, when they lose their status, women face new forms of abuses in the workplace, facilitated by the fact that they have very limited access to formal rights. For example, one of them said, "I was forced to accept being paid for like $6 or $7 an hour. On a few occasions, my employer was simply refused to pay me. When this happened, you can't easily claim from SINES like workers who have status. I was also too afraid to lose my job or being reported to immigration that I didn't do anything." The same goes for access to compensation in the case of workplace accident. Since non-status people have to pay for their health care, most of the women say that unless they have a health-threatening situation, they won't go to the hospital, which cuts them off from the compensation process. Thus, in their critical analysis, they highlight the continuum of gender-based violence throughout their migration process. This supports the idea that having experienced violence in the past affects their self-esteem and makes them more vulnerable to experience future abuse. Now, I still have 5 minutes. I have it here. Now, to address the specific issue of gender-based violence in the context of migration, the Women's Committee members foresee 2 complementary solutions. The first is the creation of a regularization program guaranteeing citizenship to as many people as possible. In fact, by obtaining citizenship, they gain de facto access to all rights and compensation protection regimes. And deportation becomes no longer a valid threat. However, they believe that it is impossible for regularization programs to include everybody. They therefore see the expansion of all social protection measures to undocumented people, such as better access to justice and healthcare, as a potential solution to gender-based violence. My data collection covers the 3 campaigns run by the Women's Committee. I was able to observe a progression in the means of action used by the committee group to make their demands heard. Indeed, the group very first campaign focused on access to justice, mainly involved writing. Between 2019 and 2022, they wrote an open letter, sent postcards to minister, and draft a brief for a consultation with the Quebec Ministry of Labor. Then between 2021 and 2024, they took part in the national campaign for regularization of non-status immigrants, during which they mainly used storytelling. For instance, on 4 occasions, members of the group met with the immigration minister to tell them about their migratory journey and to present clear demands concerning the criteria for the future program. Finally, also between 2021 and 2024, they decided to carry out their own research project to document health conditions of non-status people in Quebec in preparation for a future campaign. Indeed, they realized that Quebec has very little scientific data focusing specifically on non-status population. As a result, they hope to use this data to defend their demands for truly universal access to healthcare. By stepping out of the shadow to denounce the consequences of the public policies on the lives of non-status people, the committee members have been able to fill certain empathy gap among decision makers. With all this, it seems that the members of the Women's Committee managed to perform a certain type of citizenship despite being excluded from the formal one. Moreover, their activity highlight a feminist version of the grassroots citizenship. Indeed, in coherence with the adage, the personal is political, their demonstration of solidarity are embodied in everyday life and transcend the struggle. Then based on their analysis on the structure and on the structural causes of gender-based violence, the member use emotion in their action to demand social change. Now, coming back to the research question, the Women's Committee response to sexual harassment in the workplace operates on two levels. First, their mutual support and solidarity they have developed among each other enables them to compensate in part for the lack of social protection. Secondly, they oppose this lack of social protection through collective action. And considering their absence of valid status, they analyze that their analysis leads them to fight simultaneously on two fronts, which are access to citizenship and access to social rights for undocumented people. Now let's wait and see where these battles leads them. 16 minutes. Thank you.